What if I told you that I wasn't born to live, but to survive? What if I told you that I was sold by my own stepfather in a dusty village in the northeast of Brazil in exchange for 3 sacks of flour? My name is Luísa Pereira da Silva. I'm 82 years old, and I come from a forgotten place. One of those towns so dry that people don't cry. They just bury their pain under the dust. I was born in 1970, or so they told me. No one really celebrated my birth. I didn't get to see a birthday cake until I was over 40. And hugs. I learned what those were by watching TV at my neighbor's house, not from my mother. My father died when I was little, but the real silence in our house didn't begin with his absence. It began with my mother's new man, João Batista. I was about 9 years old when he came into our lives. At first, I was curious. He wasn't like the other men in the village. He had hard eyes, but a soft voice. He brought my mother sugar, made her laugh. He brought bread sometimes, and I just watched. It didn't take long before I started fearing his footsteps. The first time I felt something was wrong was when he closed the door behind me and told me to stand still. I froze. I don't know if I was more afraid of him or of my mother, who was just a few meters away and didn't say a word. From that day on, my body stopped being mine. He would call me to help him with the animals, to fetch water, to bring something from the shed, and I always came back dirtier than I left, not with mud, but with shame. I couldn't cry. In that house, no one cried. I couldn't tell anyone. In that town, girls had no voice. And I couldn't run away. Not yet. My legs were still too thin. My hope still tied to the thin thread that maybe someone would notice. But no one did. When I turned 13, my life broke in half. We had no food at home. That wasn't new. But that day, João left early with the only cart we had and came back at dusk. He was smiling. My mother had a strange look in her eyes. They didn't talk to me. They just told me to put on my good dress, and I obeyed. That night, I sat at the table and saw, for the first time in months, a hot meal, rice, beans, and chicken. But I couldn't swallow. Something inside me was screaming. After dinner, João said, "Tomorrow, you're going to help a family from the capital. You'll earn your keep." I didn't ask. I didn't cry. I just stared at the wall while the world collapsed in silence. The next day, I found out the truth. I hadn't been sent to help. I'd been sold for 3 sacks of flour. A neighbor overheard the deal and later whispered it to me years after. But at the time, I only understood that I'd never return home again. They put me on a cart with a bag of clothes and sent me off with a couple I didn't know. And that's how my life The life I could have had was stolen, not by war, not by disease, but by the very people who were supposed to protect me. Today, so many decades later, I tell this story not because I've healed, but because I refuse to die without telling the truth. And if you made it this far, I want to ask you something. Write in the comments. I believe every woman has the right to speak. That way, I'll know this story touched your heart. Like, share this video, and subscribe to this channel, because our silence has lasted long enough. The house I was taken to was large, not luxurious, just large. It had many rooms, walls painted in pale colors, and a smell of bleach that burned my eyes. The couple who took me in were called Mr. Alvaro and Mrs. Madalena. He was thin, tall, and looked at me like a farmer looks at cattle. She had hair tied in a bun, and eyes that scanned me from head to toe like I was a used item. They didn't ask me if I was okay. They didn't ask me my name. They just asked my age. And when I said 13, she smirked. Good, young, enough to learn, she said. From that day on, I became the house ghost. I swept the courtyard before the sun rose. I cleaned the toilets, made the beds, ironed their clothes. I wasn't called Luísa. I wasn't called anything. They referred to me as the girl. Meals, I ate what was left over. If there was any. Shoes, I wore the ones that didn't fit their daughter anymore. School, that was for their children. I stayed home to help at night. I slept on a small mattress in the laundry room. The light bulb blinked, and the walls were damp. I clutched a piece of cloth I brought from my old home, the only thing that still smelled like my childhood. It was there, in that laundry room, that I learned what it meant to be nothing. A few weeks after arriving, he came, Mr. Alvaro. He entered without knocking, closed the door, sat on the stool next to the sink, and stared at me. I was folding clothes. I didn't dare lift my head. Do you know how to behave, girl? He asked. I nodded. Do you know what happens to girls who disobey their masters? I didn't answer. He got up, approached, and whispered in my ear, "You'll call me, sir. You'll do what I say, or I'll send you back." But back wasn't a home. Back meant returning to Jewel, to being sold again, or worse. So I nodded, and from that day on, I obeyed. He would come into the laundry room at night, close the door, tell me to stay quiet, and do what he wanted. My body would leave me. It was the only way I knew how to survive. Sometimes I would stare at the light bulb until it burned my eyes, so I wouldn't feel his hands, so I wouldn't feel myself. There were nights I bled, nights I fainted, nights I begged silently for death to come in my sleep. But morning always came, and I had to sweep and smile and serve. Mrs. Madalena never said anything. She knew. She heard. She saw the bruises. She saw my trembling. But in that house, my pain was part of the routine. No one questioned it. No one cared. One day, I tried to escape. I packed the little I had in a sack, tried to leave before dawn, but he caught me at the gate. He dragged me by the hair, beat me until I couldn't move, then left me lying in the laundry room for 2 days, without food, without water. And still, I stayed, not because I wanted to, but because the world outside had already told me there was no place for girls like me. I was 14 when I realized that my voice had no sound anymore, even when I screamed, even when I cried. No one heard. It was like I was slowly disappearing, until there was only my shadow left. I was barely 15 when I realized something was wrong with my body. My belly was swelling, my chest ached, and my cycle, which had only just begun to regulate, suddenly disappeared. At first, I thought it was a punishment, that somehow the devil had finally taken over my insides, because that's what I was told as a child, that evil lives inside sinful women. But it wasn't the devil. It was a life, a little seed growing inside me, not out of love, but out of violation. I was pregnant with his child. I remember sitting on the cold tile floor, hugging my knees, unable to cry, because crying would have made it real. And I still wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. When Mrs. Madalena noticed, she didn't scream. She didn't ask who the father was. She just sighed and said, "Of course," like all the others. And from that moment, I ceased to be the girl. I became the problem, a belly that had to be hidden, a shame that needed to be silenced. I wasn't taken to a hospital. No checkups, no vitamins. No one talked about my baby like it was a baby. They just said, "It'll be born and given away. Don't get attached. It's not yours." But how could it not be mine if it grew inside me, if it kicked when I lay down, if I could feel its hiccups at night while curled up in the dark? For the first time in my life, someone needed me, even if it was someone I never chose to create. And even with all the pain, something in me started to love. I began to talk to my belly in secret, whispering stories of what I hoped her life would be. A life without cages, without fear, without men who touched without permission. When labor came, I was alone. I screamed. I bit into a cloth to keep quiet. I tore from inside. I bled. They didn't call a doctor, just a midwife who came late, annoyed, as if I were a burden. And then, after hours of pain that split my bones and my heart, she was born. Daniela. I gave her that name in my mind. No one else called her that. To them, she was just the girl's child, or the mistake. But to me, she was light. She was proof that, even in darkness, something pure could be born. I wasn't allowed to hold her at first. They took her away, washed her, wrapped her in a blanket that didn't smell like me only hours later. When no one was watching, I snuck into the room and saw her in a crib. She was so small, so silent, her lips slightly parted, dreaming of a world she didn't know was cruel. I touched her hand. She didn't wake, but her fingers curled around mine, and in that moment, I made a vow I would protect her, even if the world didn't see me as her mother, even if they tried to separate us, even if I had to give up everything I had, what little I had, to make sure she didn't live the same nightmare. But I didn't know then that love alone wasn't enough, that the same hands that had defiled me would now try to own her, too. Daniela was raised in that house, like I had been, but they didn't treat her with cruelty, not at first. To everyone else, she was their foster daughter. They gave her clothes, food, even toys, but they never let her get close to me. They said, "She doesn't need to know you're her mother. It'll confuse her. You're just the maid." So I watched my daughter grow up. From behind the door, I heard her first laugh. From the hallway, I saw her first steps. While sweeping the floor nearby, I celebrated her birthday in silence, baking a cake I wasn't allowed to eat with her. I was everything and nothing. The woman who gave her life, and the woman she wasn't allowed to love. Every time I tried to speak to her, I was punished, beaten, locked up, threatened with being thrown out and never seeing her again. And so I chose silence, because seeing her, even from a distance, was better than not seeing her at all. Years passed. She grew. Her features became mine, her laugh, her eyes, her stubbornness. She didn't know, but she was my reflection. And yet, to her, I was just the help, the woman who cleaned up after her, the one she wasn't supposed to hug. But I loved her. Oh, how I loved her. And I knew, deep inside, that one day she would need to know the truth, even if it broke her, even if it shattered the illusion they built around her, because no woman should live a life built on lies. Daniela was about 6 years old when I noticed something that sent a chill through my spine. It started with glances, with pauses that lasted too long, with comments from Mr. Alvaro that were never loud, but always sharp enough to cut through my soul. She's growing fast. She's got strong legs, like her mother. She'll be a beauty. Just like you. I wanted to believe those words were harmless, that I was just overthinking. But I had learned, with scars on my body, that some silences say more than words, and some looks are never innocent. He had looked at me like that once, and now he was watching her. I started to lose sleep. Every sound at night made me jump. Every time she ran through the house, laughing, free, I felt fear clutch my chest. Because I knew what it was like to grow up in a world where people didn't protect girls like us. I knew what it meant to be young, alone, and invisible. I tried to act, not directly. They never allowed me to speak too much to her, but I found ways. I started telling her stories while we worked in the garden, tales of courage, of young girls who fought against evil, stories about being brave, about running if something ever felt wrong. She didn't understand everything, but she listened. I stayed close to her at all times. I asked to be the one to take her to school, even if it meant waking up earlier. I offered to help with her bath, with her hair, just so I could stay aware. And when he entered a room where she was alone, I followed, always pretending to clean something, always pretending I just happened to be there. That didn't go unnoticed. They started accusing me of being too attached, saying I was overstepping boundaries, that I was confusing the child, but I didn't care. I'd been silent for too long in my life. Not this time, not with her. She didn't know I was her mother. To her, I was just the maid, the woman who cooked, who sometimes scolded, who always looked at her with watery eyes. But inside me, I was preparing for war, because something in my heart, something primal and ancient, screamed that I had to protect her, even if she didn't love me, even if she didn't understand, even if it cost me everything. One evening, she was playing alone on the porch. I watched from the kitchen window, and I saw him stop behind her, just standing there, not saying anything, not touching, just watching. And I knew what that stillness meant, what that long pause meant. I dropped the dish I was washing and ran outside. "Dinner's ready," I said loudly, my voice shaking. He turned around, gave me a strange look, not angry, not surprised, just assessing, like he knew what I was doing, like he was challenging me. From that moment on, I never let Daniela be alone with him again. I followed her shadow. I became the guardian no one asked for, because no one else was going to protect her. But it came at a price. They started turning her against me, whispering lies, saying I was jealous, possessive, crazy. And slowly, she pulled away. She stopped smiling at me, stopped running to me when she fell, started calling me you instead of Luísa. The distance grew, and the pain was unbearable. But even as she drifted further away, I knew I couldn't stop, because if I looked away, even once, I might lose her forever. And I'd already lost too much in this life. Daniela was 11, When I finally realized I couldn't keep quiet any longer, she had grown fast. Her body was changing, and I knew that her innocence was becoming more fragile by the day. And more than that, I could feel his presence again. The way he lingered, the way he watched her from across the room, always with that unsettling silence. I couldn't protect her forever by just being near. At some point, she needed to understand. She needed to know who I was and what she was in danger of. But how do you tell a child that her life was built on silence, that her existence came from pain, that the woman she calls Mom isn't her mother, and that her real mother has been watching her from the shadows, loving her in silence since the day she was born? I waited for a moment that felt safe. It was early evening. She was sitting in the backyard, playing with a book, her feet swinging above the dirt. I sat beside her, slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Daniela," I said softly, "can I tell you a story?" She shrugged, not looking at me. So I told her, not everything at once, but enough. I told her about a girl, very young, who was taken from her home and made to work in a house that wasn't hers. A girl who was treated like she didn't matter, and who, in the midst of that silence and sorrow, gave birth to a child she loved more than anything, even if no one allowed her to show it. Daniela was quiet. At first, she thought I was making it up, but then I looked into her eyes, and I said, "That girl is me, and that child is you." She froze. Her expression changed from confusion to disbelief, to something I had feared all along. She stood up, took a step back, and asked in a trembling voice, "Why are you lying?" That question tore me apart. I tried to hold her hand, but she pulled away. I tried to explain, to tell her how I had been forced into silence, how I had wanted to tell her for so long, but she wasn't ready. She ran inside, told Mrs. Madalena, told Mr. Alvaro, told them I was saying strange things, and that night I was called into the kitchen like a criminal. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just looked at me and said, "You're done here." Just like that, they packed my things, left me with a small bag of clothes and a few coins, opened the gate, and told me to leave. It was raining. I stepped out without an umbrella, without a goodbye, without her, my daughter, the one I carried, the one I had protected for so long, watched from the window. No tears, no words, just silence. I walked away, soaked, heartbroken, and hollow. But deep inside, I knew I had done the right thing, because she might hate me now. But one day, she would remember that moment, and she would question the lies, and maybe she would find her way back to me. After I left that house, I wondered, aimlessly for days. The small town where they had kept me hidden all those years didn't offer much. I slept in the back of an abandoned church one night, under a torn top the next. My shoes were worn down to the sole. My hands were cracked from years of scrubbing floors, and now they had nothing left to clean except the pieces of my own soul. No one offered help. People looked at me like I was invisible, a woman with no documents, no home, no last name anyone cared about. I knocked on doors looking for work, but no one wanted to hire someone who looked like she carried sorrow in her eyes, and I did, because I had left behind the only piece of light I ever had, my daughter. Even though she had rejected me, even though she had looked at me like a stranger, her name was still stitched inside every breath I took. Daniela. I whispered it at night like a prayer. I wrote it with my finger on dusty walls. I clutched it against my chest when hunger twisted my insides. Weeks passed. I ended up in a small, rural town where an older woman, Donna Clarice, allowed me to stay in exchange for helping on her farm. She had no children, no husband, and no expectations. I slept in a shed with a straw mattress and a tin roof. It wasn't warm, but it was mine. For the first time in decades, I could close my eyes without waiting for footsteps in the dark. But the freedom didn't bring peace. I missed Daniela with an ache that had no name. I wondered how she was, if she still braided her hair the same way, if she still sang to her dolls at night. I wondered if they had told her something cruel about me, if they had erased me completely from her life. One day, I went to the town center and saw a young girl around her age. She had dark eyes, long legs, and a tired expression, and my knees gave out because for a second I thought it was her. I cried in public like a mad woman. People passed by, whispering, but no one knew that I wasn't weeping for the girl I saw. I was weeping for the one I had lost. I started writing letters, not to send. I had no address, no contact, but to remember. I wrote, "Dear Daniela, I saw you today in the wind. I heard your laughter in the trees. I miss you in every breath. I love you even if you never say my name again." Those letters became my only form of survival. Each word was a piece of the mother I wasn't allowed to be. Years passed. I stayed in that small town, working, saving coins, hoping that maybe one day I could try to find her. I knew she was growing, becoming a woman, and I feared the same world that had broken me would try to break her too. And yet, I also feared that if I appeared again, she would turn away. So I waited. I watched her grow in my memories. I imagined her learning to ride a bike, going to school dances, laughing with friends, loving someone. and I prayed that whoever came into her life would treat her with the love and dignity I had never received. One night, I dreamed she was standing at my door. She knocked. I opened. She didn't say a word, just fell into my arms and whispered, "Mama." I woke up sobbing, but I held on to that dream. Because even if the world forgot me, even if time erased my name from every record, she had lived inside me, and no one could take that from me. I was already in my 60s when I returned to the town where I had left Daniela behind. My hair was almost completely gray, my back curved forward from years of heavy labor. My hands were wrinkled and hard, but still able to hold a broom, a hoe, or a pencil when I wrote her name over and over again in my old notebook. I didn't go back to look for vengeance, nor did I expect a happy reunion. I just wanted to know if she was alive, if she was well, if she had grown into the woman I had once dreamed she would be, strong, safe, and free. The town had changed. Paved streets, new houses, shops with signs I didn't recognize, but my memory knew the way. I walked past the gate where I once stood, soaked in rain. As they threw me out, I didn't dare go in. I just stood across the street, watching, and then I saw her. She was stepping out of a car, older now, maybe in her late 20s, wearing jeans and a neat blouse, holding a small child in her arms, a little girl. My heart clenched, because even though decades had passed, even though she had grown into a woman I couldn't reach, I still knew her walk, her hands, her eyes. It was Daniela. She didn't see me. She didn't look. I watched her enter the house, the same house where we had both lived, though never truly together. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. My legs didn't want to move. My heart was louder than the street traffic, and I cried, not with the tears of someone who expected something, but with the silence of a woman who had already buried her expectations long ago. I waited until nightfall. Then I walked slowly toward the small plaza. I sat on a bench, watching mothers with their children. Some laughed, some yelled. Some held their kids so tightly it looked like they feared losing them to the wind. And I realized I had never held my daughter like that in public, never been allowed to Daniela. I was just an echo, a faded memory, or perhaps not even that. That night, I returned to the small guest room I had rented. I wrote in my notebook, "She is alive. She has a daughter. That means my love continues. Even if she forgets my face, I know her blood carries my voice." The next morning, I walked by the church. There was a small mass happening. People dressed neatly, children in their Sunday shoes. I stayed outside, but then, as the crowd began to leave, I saw her again, Daniela. She was holding the hand of the same little girl. She passed right by me, and for a second, just a second, our eyes met. I smiled, not expecting anything, just offering a piece of my heart. But she didn't recognize me. She looked at me the way you look at an old stranger on a bench. Polite, distracted, then turned away. And that's when I knew. The version of me she remembered had died long ago. But I wasn't angry, because in her hands she held life, and maybe that was enough. Maybe love, even when silent, still does its work in secret. Maybe Daniela had been protected by it, even if she never knew its source. After that day in the church square, I know, longer tried to get close. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't write a letter. I didn't ask anyone about her, because something inside me had shifted. For years, I had carried the hope that one day she would turn around, that she would hear my name and remember, that she would see my face and feel something familiar. But when our eyes met, and there was no recognition, when her hand gripped her daughter's with tenderness I had never been allowed to show her, I understood. My role had already been fulfilled, not as her mother in name, not as the woman in family photos, but as a silent wall that had kept her safe for years. It was never about her saying, "I forgive you," because I had nothing to be forgiven for. I had loved her with everything I had, even when the world forced me into silence, even when my name was erased from her memory. What I needed was something else entirely, to know she had made it, that she had grown, that she hadn't been broken like I was, that she had found a life beyond the darkness I had endured. And that day, in her hands, I saw proof of that life. A little girl with wild curls and a smile that looked like mine when I was a child. It was enough. I returned to my town with a quiet peace, not joy, not closure, but peace. I resumed my work, cooking for Donna Clarice, tending to the small garden, writing in my notebook, which by now was full of letters never sent. Sometimes I would walk to the edge of the town and sit by the old fig tree, and there I would imagine a world where things had been different, where Daniela had known me, called me Mama, brought me flowers on Sundays, asked me to braid her daughter's hair. But I didn't stay in those daydreams too long, because I had learned to live with the space that pain leaves behind, a space that doesn't disappear, but becomes part of you. I was now a woman with nothing, no family, no name in the city registry, no photos on anyone's shelf, but I had my story, and the knowledge that even the smallest act of love, even the ones done in silence, can save a life. One night, I lit a candle. I wrote her final letter, not to give, just to let it out. My daughter, you don't know me, and maybe you never will, but your laughter gave me strength. Your life gave mine meaning. And your little girl, she is a miracle. If ever you wonder where your strength comes from, look to the women before you, the ones who loved quietly and survived. I folded that letter, placed it inside a wooden box with all the others, and buried it beneath the fig tree. Because even if my words never reached her, even if my voice was never heard, they had been spoken. They had lived, just like me. The years passed slowly, like pages in a book that no one wanted to read. I turned 70, then 75, and eventually 80. Time reshaped my body in ways I couldn't fight. My hands curled inward, my knees crackled when I walked, and my breath shortened with every winter. But the one thing time couldn't erase was my memory. I still remembered her scent when she was a baby, the warmth of her small body against mine. In those secret moments, I was allowed to hold her. The sound of her voice when she said her first words, even if they weren't spoken to me, even though I hadn't seen her in years, I could still trace her face in my mind as if I had sketched it onto the walls of my thoughts 1,000 times. Daniela, she would be nearly 50 now, and I would still call her my daughter, even if, in her world, I was nobody. I spent my days sitting on a bench in the square of the little town where I had grown old, watching the children run by, smiling at mothers who scolded and hugged, and wondering if any of them had stories like mine, buried behind smiles and worn dresses. One afternoon, a girl with hair like Daniela's sat beside me. She was quiet, maybe 8 years old, eating a piece of bread with guava paste. She looked up and said, "Are you waiting for someone?" I smiled. "I've been waiting my whole life," I replied. She laughed and offered me a bite. That small gesture cracked something open inside me, because even if she wasn't mine, even if her name wasn't Daniela, her kindness reminded me that not all things are lost forever. I began to write again, not letters this time, but pieces of myself. I wrote my story in an old notebook, from the beginning. No embellishments, no hiding the wounds. I wanted someone, someday, to know the truth, to read it and say, she existed. She was a mother. She mattered, because for too long I had lived as a ghost. And now, even if my body was growing weaker each day, my story was growing stronger. I knew I would never knock on Daniela's door. That was no longer my place, but in my heart. I began to believe something I never thought possible, that maybe she had felt me all along. In the moments she protected her own daughter, in the way she held her when she cried, in the prayers she whispered in silence. Maybe she had inherited my strength without even knowing it came from me. One morning, I received a letter. It came from the town where she lived. There was no name on the return address. Inside was a small note to the woman who used to sit across the street. I don't know why, but I always felt something when I saw you. My daughter says she remembers your face from a dream. If by any chance you know who I am, thank you for watching over us. I clutched that paper to my chest, and I cried, not tears of pain this time, but of release, because even if she didn't know everything, she had felt something, and sometimes that's enough. I closed my eyes that night knowing I could rest. I had spent a lifetime trying to prove that I was a mother, but the truth was, I had always been, even when they stripped me of the title, even when I was silenced, even when she turned away. A mother's love doesn't end. It doesn't fade. It just becomes the air around her child, the voice that guides without speaking, the warmth that never asks for anything in return. I had loved Daniela completely, and that love had lived on in her child. And now, in that letter, I had been erased from the records, but not from the story. And in the end, that was enough. Now I'm 84 years old. I no longer walk as I used to. I sleep early. My bones ache in ways I can't soothe. And sometimes, when the wind is strong, I hear voices from the past, not ghosts, but echoes of what I lived. People think that old age is made of silence, but they're wrong. It's made of memories, some loud, some unbearable, and some tender. I don't have much left in this world. No children by my side, no photo albums, no visitors on Sundays. But I have something more powerful than all of that, my truth. For many years, I believed my life would end like it began, unseen, that no one would ever know the woman I was, that the love I gave would die inside my chest. But telling you this story, letting you into the places I never dared open before, has set me free. Because now someone knows. Now someone, you, carries my voice forward. I am Luísa Pereira da Silva, born in the dry lands of Ceará, Brazil. I was taken from my childhood, silenced as a young girl, erased as a mother, but I was never broken. I survived, I endured, and I never stopped loving. If you've come this far in my story, I want you to know something. You matter, your pain matters, and your silence doesn't have to last forever. If you've ever been told to be quiet, don't. If they tried to bury your voice, let it rise. If they made you believe you weren't enough, look at me. I was nothing to them, but I became everything to myself. And now, maybe, to you too. Because if my words reached your heart, if my life found a home in your thoughts, then I was never truly forgotten. And that is more than I ever asked for. Before I go, I want to ask you something. not for pity, not for sorrow, but as a final act of connection. Comment below. I reached the end because I believe in truth. Let the world know that stories like mine matter, that women like me existed, that even when our names are erased, our stories endure, like a seed under dry earth, waiting for someone to believe it can bloom again. If you felt this in your chest, if you saw your mother, your grandmother, or even yourself in me, like this video, share it, and subscribe to this channel, not for fame, but to carry voices like mine into the light. Thank you. Thank you for letting me be heard. At last, may your silence become strength, and your story never stay in the dark.